This is Paul W. Papa, author of the Max Rossi Mysteries, a crime noir series set in 1950s Las Vegas, and you're listening to the Dark and Stormy Book Club podcast.
Hello and welcome to Dark and Stormy Book Club. We are still on a little vacation period, and we have selected our interview with Anthony Horowitz for our second recast of the season, and I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to episode 222 of Dark and Stormy Book Club. Today we have a talk with the wonderful Anthony Horowitz. Enjoy.
I'm Ann Dart.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you.
Internationally best-selling author Anthony Horowitz, third James Bond novel, After Forever and a Day. It is M's funeral. One man is missing from the graveside, the traitor who pulled the trigger and who is now in custody, accused of M's murder. James Bond. Behind the Iron Curtain, a group of former Smersh agents want to use the British spy in an operation that will change the balance of world power. Bond is smuggled into the lion's den. But whose orders is he following? And will he obey them when the moment of truth arrives? In a mission where treachery is all around and one false move means death, Bond must grapple with the darkest questions about himself, but not even he knows what has happened to the man he used to be. With a Mind to Kill is put out by Harper and it was released on May 24th of this year. We are thrilled to welcome to the program Anthony Horowitz, and we're going to talk about one of his many, many books, With a Mind to Kill. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to talk to you.
This is the third in your Bond series. Why are you going to end it?
The question is more, why did I decide to write it? Because originally I was only ever going to do one Bond novel. That was Trigger Mortis, way back in about, I think it was 2014 I got asked to do that. I never thought I would do a second one, but Trigger Mortis was successful and the estate said that they thought it would be a good idea. That is the Ian Fleming estate. So I agreed to write Forever and a Day. And when I finished that, I thought I was done with Bond, and that was the end. But then the estate again said maybe a third one. And I thought to myself, well, look, I've done the beginning of his career, Forever and a Day. I've done the middle of his career, Trigger Mortis. Maybe I could do one more, and it's the end of his career. And that makes a nice trilogy, and I can stop there. So that's how it happened.
Okay. I loved the ending because you kind of leave it up in the air.
I wanted an ending that was sort of ambiguous. I mean, the struggle with the book was not to make it too downbeat, too depressing. And I certainly wasn't going to kill Bond. I can say that to you, you could say that's a bit of a spoiler, but I have gone on record as saying that it's not something I would ever do because I think it's not commenting on anybody else's work. But for me, Bond is forever. But how would he end? In my world, what would be his final moment? I had to make sure that it was not too down, but it was something that there was hope in that.
Yes, and you did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
What's next?
Well, for me, lots of different things. My Hawthorne series, which began with The Word is Murder, then The Sentence is Death, and then A Line to Kill. It's followed by a fourth book coming out this fall in America called The Twist of a Knife. And that's a series of, I think, 12 books about a detective and the writer that he uses to write his books. The slightly odd twist being that the writer he approaches to write about him is me. So I am Watson to his Holmes, and I'm in the books myself. Reluctantly, I have to say. There are 12 of those books, and so another 8 after the next. I'm probably going to do another Alex Rider book, and I'm going to do a third book in the series, which began with Magpie Murders, Moonflower Murders, and there's a third book in that series. You can see it on TV, incidentally, later this year on PBS.
Oh, good.
Magpie Murders. So, you know, even as I talk to you, I realize how much work I have ahead of me and how much writing there is to do.
I'm surprised you're not writing as we talk.
Well, as a matter of fact, I am, but just on the side.
Grandson is a huge fan of Alex Rider. He loves those books, and he likes the Diamond Brother books too. But
well, it's funny you should mention that, you know, because I mean, I've had 3 books published this year. It's not due to sort of excessive overwriting on my behalf. It's more to do with COVID, of course, which has put a block in the pipeway of publishing. And the most recent book of mine is a new Diamond Brothers book. It's called Where Seagulls Dare. All the titles of these books are based on films that I loved when I was younger. And Tim Diamond and Nick Diamond, after 20 years, have made a return to the page. So I hope your grandson manages to get hold of a copy. I don't even know if it's going to be published in America, but if it isn't, of course, you can get it on Amazon all over the world.
he'll be thrilled to hear that.
I'm delighted.
And you're also, in your spare time, create wonderful television programs. You did the Midsummer Murders, which I love, except I'm still mourning the loss of John Nettles.
Oh, yes.
The new guy is doing all right, but he's just not John Nettles. And then Foyle's War is just one of my favorites.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you. I mean, Foyle's War was 16 years of my life. It was a wonderful show to work on. My wife was the producer, and working with Michael Kitchen for all those years was a unforgettable experience. I think we did some fantastic work. And what pleases me is that even though it's been many years now since I wrote an episode of it, it's still available very widely on television. Almost every week, it seems, someone is showing an episode of Foyle's War.
Yes, it's very, very good. Now, you also wrote, and this is where I found you, was when you wrote the Sherlock Holmes book, The House of Silk. That was the first book of yours that I personally read, and I devoured it. It was wonderful.
You're very kind. Thank you. I mean, I loved writing it. That was the first continuation novel. That's the phrase people use about these sorts of books. I don't love it, but that's what they're called. That was the first continuation novel I wrote. When the Conan Doyle estate approached me, it was something I just had to do because ever since I was 17, I have loved Sherlock Holmes. I love all of Doyle's work, actually. I mean, the Brigadier Gerard books are terrific too. It was a fantastic experience to write it, to spend 6 months of my life inside 221B Baker Street in the company of 2 of the greatest characters in British fiction. It was just irresistible. I loved it.
You should write a third.
Well, I don't know if you've read the sequel. It's not exactly.
Oh, yes, I read Moriarty.
Moriarty is a much darker book. I loved writing that too because it was a return to that world. But having done Sherlock Holmes once, I didn't feel I could do the same again. So I decided, instead of writing about Holmes, to write about the most evil man in literature, who is, of course, Professor James Moriarty. And therefore, I made the decision right from the start, but it had to be an evil book. Could I write a book that would somehow convey to the reader the true evilness of Moriarty? So the book itself is evil and has an ending, which is a sort of a bit of a shock when you come upon it. But I'm very proud of both books, and I think that they both worked in different ways, but I think they work.
Well, returning to James Bond, when I read this book, I was picturing Sean Connery, the classic early Bond, the ones that have done it since he left. They aren't James Bond to me. Sean Connery will always be James Bond.
Well, it's I'm not entirely in agreement with you. I think that I loved Sean Connery, and he probably remains my favorite Bond. You know, when I write the books, I always say that every word I write that Bond speaks, I'm hearing Sean Connery deliver the lines. Although at the same time, I'm often seeing Daniel Craig. And I think that Casino Royale, the first of the Daniel Craig Bond films, is as good as anything Connery did. I think it's a terrific movie. And I have a soft spot for Timothy Dalton's two Bonds and Pierce Brosnan's. I met George Lazenby once, and I then went back and watched On Her Majesty's Secret Service and enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. And Roger Moore, well, I think, you know, he's aged with time, those films, but I still remember seeing them when they first came out and loving them. You know, I think that Bond you love tells you something about your age, first and foremost, but there have been some terrific Bond pictures along the way. The best, I agree with you, though, to go around in full circle, definitely Sean Connery.
Yes. Now you have the classic Bond villain in Colonel Boris, but when I read the book, I'm picturing the evil people that he's met over the years, and he fits right in there. Even well, I guess you would call her a Bond girl, the Russian agent that gets very close to him. You have just fit the pattern of the James Bond books.
You
Right
couldn't say
down
anything
to
nicer.
the T.
I mean, to be honest with you, when I write these Bond novels, my first and the most important priority for me is to try and be as true to Ian Fleming as possible. So to pick up on those two characters you mentioned, Colonel Boris is actually an Ian Fleming creation. In From Russia with Love, Colonel Boris gets just a one-line mention, but he's there in the background somewhere. But then on The Man with the Golden Gun, we learn that Bond was kidnapped and captured by Colonel Boris in Moscow, and that he was tortured and brainwashed and then sent back to kill M, which is where the new book, With a Mind to Kill, begins. So he is an Ian Fleming creation. As to what you call the Bond girl, which I have to tell you is a word I never use anymore, because in these times, it so objectifies young women to be called, the possession of another man, that one gets into trouble if one isn't careful using the term. Listen, you and I both know what we mean by it, and Bond girl is a shorthand for it. But one of the things about the Bond novels is to try not to offend people with a modern sensibility by saying things about characters that might feel, dated. It's a very, very difficult balancing act. But I loved writing Kat. She's such an interesting character, a psychiatric nurse who actually knows the inside of Bond's head because she helped to brainwash him. And now there she is sort of looking after him, and they're forming a relationship. And obviously that relationship is going to go the same direction of all Bond relationships. And yet there's this terrible cat and mouse game between them. How much do they each know about each other? What do they really want? What secrets are they hiding? I found it really enjoyable writing about the two of them together.
She was a good character in this book. I enjoyed her very much.
Oh, you're kind, thank you.
Let's face it, the early Bond books, women were objectified. They were use them and throw them away.
I do want to say immediately that I wasn't criticizing you just now about your use of language at all, and forgive me if that's what it seems to be. I'm just saying that of course you are correct that Bond, Ian Fleming, sees women in a certain way through the lens of the 1950s and 60s. And of course, he also sees, various ethnicities in a different way and religions in a different way. And one of the jobs of the modern Bond writer, to be true to that vision, not to try and change things. I'll give you an example. In this modern age, one might be tempted to take Bond's cigarettes away from him and to say he doesn't smoke anymore, or he doesn't drink alcohol anymore because these are so bad for you. But that would be ridiculous. I mean, a Bond, for me, vaping in a book would be nonsensical. So you sort of take him warts and all. The funny thing is that I've never thought Bond's attitude to women to be particularly unattractive. I mean, he's in most of the books, he is very, very kind to women. One thinks of Gala Brand in Moonraker, or Tracy on Her Majesty's Secret Service. First time he sees her, she's trying to commit suicide, and he ends up marrying her. It's a short-lived marriage, but nonetheless, he heals her, he helps her. He does the same, for that matter, for Honey Child Rider in Dr. No. The first time he sees her, I think her hand has touched an urchin or something, and he sucks out the poison to help her. So although he has a strong sex drive, I have always thought that he is not actually a sexist.
No, I don't think he is. I think he loves women.
He loves women, he is drawn to women, he needs women. And it's rather sad that he's unable to have a long-term relationship with a woman. That's one of the sadnesses. And I think I mentioned it in the book, With a Mind to Kill. The fact that he, has spent his whole life on his own. Yes, he has affairs. He doesn't have long-term relationships. That's part of his character. It's, I think, part of his mystique. But if you think about it for a bit, it's also on one level quite sad.
Ian Fleming tends to kill off the women.
But by and large, the women in the books are normally saved by Bond and are not killed. I'm trying to think if there are any other women that actually die in the James Bond novels.
Talking about the movies.
Now that's interesting because, of course, you see a lot of people think that the movies and the books are interconnected, but my books have absolutely nothing to do with the movies. What happens in the movies is never referenced in my books, just as the movies themselves have never, except for one scene, have never actually included anything from a continuation novel of Bond. They exist in their own world. And it's interesting because, back in the 50s, Ian Fleming sold the underlying rights in the character of James Bond to Eon Productions in perpetuity, forever. Which means that company, Eon, now own the film rights to Bond, and the family, Ian Fleming's descendants, relatives, don't really have a lot of say in what happens. They control the books. They control the books, and I work for them. Eon Productions do their own thing, and their last, No Time to Die. It's their vision of Bond. So it's like parallel universes, parallel worlds.
Very interesting. Now, did Ian Fleming's family? They kept the Bond name, right?
The Ian Fleming family have an enormous amount of control over the trademark 007, the name James Bond, and the books only exist with their permission and their authority. They invited me to write the Bond novel, which allowed me to do that, to write my 3 Bond novels. I could not have sat down and just written a James Bond novel and sold it to a publisher without their permission. They would have been unlikely to give it to somebody they hadn't chosen themselves. They know Bond inside out. And I have to tell you, they do a fantastic job of protecting the character and protecting Ian Fleming's legacy and the world of it. At the same time, they were very, very easy to work with, very helpful, knowledgeable, generous. I can say they became part of my family. What I mean is I became part of theirs.
Wonderful. Tell me what's coming next, a new Alex Rider book, which my grandson will be thrilled, even though he's in college now. So he isn't quite that age group, but he will still, I'm sure, love this book. Now, the other series you write is that Power of Five, which is more of a fantasy. So you cover every genre.
I think the only genre I'm not known for is romance and maybe poetry. Otherwise, I write pretty much everything.
Great. Well, Anthony, we thank you for talking with us and spending a few precious minutes from your writing, and get back to work.
You try and stop me. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, though. Thank you so much for inviting me.
We'll look forward to the next Hawthorne and Horowitz coming out this fall. Anything else you write?
I hope there'll be plenty more to read in the future.
I hope so, too. Thank you, Anthony, and you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode. Thank you for being here with us, and we hope you join us next week. And remember,
life would be boring without a little mystery. Bye.